Welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast, helping engineers, producers, and artists create professional recordings and mixes, even from home. I'm your host, Mike and Davina. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike and Davina, and thank you for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Brad Garcia, and if you're not familiar with Brad is a musician, a composer, a songwriter, a producer based out of the Toronto area. He's also had a lot of success with his bands. He's in a band called Locket, which used to be called Safe to Say, and he's also in another band called Like Pacific. And in today's episode, we dive deeper into Brad's work in the music publishing space. Now, I know a lot of you listening to this may be songwriters yourselves, and you might be trying to figure out different avenues that you might be able to make some money off of your music with. And the world of music publishing is definitely a potentially lucrative area that a lot of people don't consider. And music publishing can entail so many different things. It could be writing songs for other musicians. It can be doing what Brad does, which is writing music for picture and for TV commercials and that kind of thing. And we get into all the specifics about what's involved with music publishing and taking on these kind of gigs and how to break into the industry with this. And I think you're going to find it very fascinating. You know, Brad talked about how sometimes you'll just get hired to write 6 seconds worth of music. You know, how crazy is that you can get paid to make 6 seconds worth of music? You know, so cool. And again, definitely an area of the music industry that I think a lot of people forget about. And like Brad talks about in this interview, you know, a lot of us start from this place of wanting to be musicians ourselves and be the rock stars in bands and that kind of thing. But sometimes there's other avenues where you can have a more sustainable career. So in this episode, I think you're going to learn a lot about music publishing and what's involved with it. So if you're someone who's interested in the world of music publishing and getting your songs licensed and all that kind of stuff, you're going to really enjoy this episode. So with that said, let's just jump into it. Brad Garcia, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. What's going on, man?
Not much, just enjoying release week with the band and getting dinner ready for my wife.
Right on. Making something good?
Making a butternut squash soup.
Ooh,
yeah,
lovely.
That time of the year.
Of course, yeah. For people who might not be familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of your background in terms of who you are, what you do, and ultimately how you got into everything?
Yeah, I guess most people, if they do know who I am, it's because of one of my bands. The main one being Locket, who was formerly under the moniker Safe to Say for most of the 2010s, between 2012 and 2017, I would say. Playing pretty actively in like the local Toronto scene, and then things start to snowball when one band in your scene gets picked up. So we were fortunate enough to tour around the States a bunch, to go to Europe, to go to the UK. We did a full stint of the Vans Warped Tour right before that came to an end, which was an awesome kind of bucket list experience for us. And then we in 2017. 2018, we kind of regrouped and rebranded ourselves as Locket. We've been putting out music through Fearless Records in the States, and we're an entirely, I guess, self-contained unit, if you want to call it that. We're kind of very hands-on with everything from the artwork. We self-engineer everything. Our guitarist, Corey, is our primary mix engineer, unless, I have my 2 cents to throw into the mix. But that's kind of our thing. We just like to create stuff together and be as hands-on as possible.
I love it. How did you get into the production side of things? Like, obviously you started as a musician, but like, where did that come into play for you? Yeah,
I think most producers are probably musicians. It would seem very odd to be if they weren't. I think just being in the studio, like we have I guess we're fortunate in the sense that Corey technically runs a commercial studio in Ottawa. So we have like all these tools at our disposal and have had them at our disposal for however many years. And Corey having gone to Algonquin, doing their like, whatever that program is there for sound engineering and all that. He's just a guy who's like very eager to show what he knows and to share what he knows. And because we, kind of have the keys to the studio, which most bands don't have, it was like the perfect environment to kind of just like be the fly on the wall over the years and learn to pick things up. Not necessarily realizing that, down the road, my life would end up being this like full-time producer, composer, whatever you want to call it, sort of career. But that was like my introduction into, I guess what you want to call producing. And then, you have friends in the local scene that want to record music with you and if they want to record with someone like Corey or someone like a Sam or an Anton, it's very common to like bring other friends on board. I don't know if that's the case everywhere, but our little community and our little, I don't know, our corner of the music scene seems very collaborative, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, the Toronto scene is definitely very collaborative. Very, very small community of people.
Yeah, and there's like an overlap of people playing in multiple bands, myself included. So you're always trying to like bring all the pieces together, no matter what the project is. So there were little projects here and there over the years that I happened to just be in the studio, whether it was because I was hanging out or because they wanted me to to write and lend my ears to a record. And then I think around 2020. So we signed to Fearless with the band in 2019. And then around 2020, we were offered a publishing deal from Concord Music Publishing. And that company actually acquired our label, I think the same year or earlier, the year before. So one of the first conversations I had with my publisher, Tom, was, like, how can I like make the most of this situation on the publishing front? Because he was the first person that was so on the nose, so brutally honest about our record deal, kind of saying, we're here to bleed you dry, essentially. Like, this is the business of exploitation. So if
that's exactly what you want to hear whenever you sign a deal, right?
Yeah, you know what? I am so appreciative of that, because it totally changed how I see the band and its role in my life. When the publishing deal was offered by him, being someone who works for the company who is quote unquote bleeding us dry, someone like me like appreciates hearing something like that, because he's not just saying that to be like, throw his middle fingers up and say, we're going to squeeze you and leave you in the lurch. It's kind of like, here's your lifeline. Here is something that can benefit you more than just these songs you have with your band. So of course the pandemic hits, and the whole music world is kind of in high panic mode, which it was almost like the perfect storm and the perfect recipe for me to kind of like put all of these years of being the fly on the wall, knowing how to use the gear, knowing how to arrange and how to write and how to compose, and kind of like fully immerse myself with a nothing to lose kind of attitude. Because it's not like if I spend a week grinding away learning how to write an orchestral trailer piece of music, I'm not losing anything, because you can't work retail, you can't work your regular office job, you can't be on the road with the band. So I was really appreciative of that, in the sense that it was like I said, like a lifeline being thrown. Yeah, and then from there, kind of just trying to find that little avenue that like resonates the most with me, which is still something that I find is changing all the time. The same guy, Tom DeSavia, said to me, there are two ways you could go about this publishing thing. You can go artist route and try to fight for those top 40 hits, get in the room, mingle with other producers and engineers and artists, or you could go the other way and do the music to picture side. And he said, most people try to do the artist thing because it is seen by the majority as like the cooler approach or the cooler avenue, which was a surprise to me, because that's not how I viewed it at all.
Interesting.
Even though I was like, eager to have the connections now to possibly get in the room with some artists or producers I admired and looked up to. I've just like always had a love for TV music and like film music. That's just stuff that like itches my brain the right way.
Yeah.
So I kind of tried to get my foot into both off the jump. And I am a person who does not like to waste too much time if I don't see like a clear path to what I'm trying to get to. So it was helpful to like do the artist kind of like, pitching demos and working with other producers just to like get my production chops up. And I was primarily doing it in like the pop, hip hop, R&B space, which is like so different than the band world I'm accustomed to. But it was like a great learning experience. And then from there, I found getting stuff synced or, placed or like pitched to use for brands, which is essentially what I do, like the bulk of my work in now, um, it was so much easier. Like so much easier in that I didn't have to rely on other people. It's something for the most part that like if you don't need to collaborate, you don't have to. You can do most of it yourself in a home setup like I have, which is great. It's super flexible. And yeah, that's like kind of how I got off the ground running. I mean, I could talk at length about like, every step in between, 2020 and now as well. Um, but that's primarily like how I got into all of this.
But that's cool though, and I think that that is really awesome of your publisher to like be as honest with you about that.
Mm.
And it obviously sounds like you had someone in your corner who really believed in you and what you were doing enough to even have that conversation, right? Like, I'm
Yeah,
sure if they didn't feel that
absolutely.
way, they'd just be like, yeah, you're a new signing, you're an artist, like, just do your thing. But at least like giving you those options open the door to an opportunity for you to, try to get in there. And
Yeah.
that in itself was probably a test of some sort to see like, how hungry are these people, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I do think that there's like I'm at this age right now where a lot of the friends I have that are in bands we came up with are, either closing the door on that chapter and moving on to the regular day job or the career path or, putting that university degree to use. I do find there is a huge difference between a band of band people and a band of musicians. And
Mm-hmm.
I say that because I have so many friends that are in like maybe panic mode, maybe kind of like, what am I going to do if the band and the gigging and the touring comes to an end, if I'm not making records anymore? And I've just learned that like there's so much more that being in a band can offer. This publishing deal being one of them. Writing for sync, that's a huge thing. Like in Nashville, a lot of the writers and artists I know, that's like their bread and butter. That is like what puts a roof over their head. And when you've been doing this as long as I have, like in music in some way or another, it's almost like, do I have transferable skills? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So to be able to like use everything you have learned from, working with others in the studio, producing, making mix revisions, doing all this stuff, and then finding a different avenue that's actually like, you know, making you money and paying bills and putting a roof over your head. I feel like the musicians will seek that out.
Hmm.
Is often what I find, and a lot of the people that do what I do, have played in bands. They know how to do everything, which is probably becoming more common now. I'm sure like most people you talk to will say the same thing, but it's rare to find someone who just mixes or someone who just engineers. Like everyone has something they enjoy doing more than everything else.
Yeah.
Um, but especially in my line of work now, uh, the turnaround times are crazy. They are 24 hours. Like I got sent a job earlier this afternoon. It's due tomorrow at 4, and that's more common than getting a full work week, timeline to turn something around. And that 24 hours, the music has to be written. It's got to be mixed. It's got to be mastered. It potentially has to be revised before that deadline comes in.
Wow.
So you get used to just like really, really pumping stuff out fast. And if you can, if you can't mix and you can't master and you can't tweak these things up to the level that the pros can do, you're kind of going to get left behind. You're not going to be able to hit the deadlines, or you're not going to be able to hit a deadline and make it competitive enough. I guess you could say that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, like the quicker you get, the more you optimize your systems and all that stuff, the faster your output's going to be, and potentially the more opportunities you're going to get, and all that kind of stuff. So that makes a lot of sense there. Um, so like going back to when you were kind of exploring this publishing route, like where did you start with that? Because you obviously came into it from like the band side of things.
Yeah.
So did you just like at that point were you just like, okay, I'm just gonna write a crap ton of material and build up a portfolio and present this, or like what did that look like?
Yeah, essentially. When they signed us to publishing, they were essentially after the band. They wanted our catalog. They paid us the advance for music we had previously released. And then I think when they realized that 2 out of the 4 of us are like, this is what we do. We produce, we engineer, we mix, we compose, we write for other people. I think their ears kind of perked up a little bit. Um, and immediately I started getting emails saying, hey, do you want to pitch for this or do you want to pitch for that? But my publisher, again, coming in clutch, told me, if you're going to do anything, I would suggest put together maybe 10 demos, 10 songs. That's kind of something that can show how broad your palette is. Because it is also a game of relationships when you're in like this kind of work. That's something that also makes the writing for artists kind of hard for people, especially like if you're me, like coming from band world and then like trying to get your foot in the door in the pop, hip hop, whatever world. Unless you know someone, it can feel like it's an impossible task. So yeah, I probably put together like 30 to 40 tracks and then sent them maybe 10 or 15 after I could like filter through. But in there was everything from just like, straight out top 40 trap, hip hop, whatever, to underscores, to trailer cues, to little things like that, just to show like, hey, I think I can do this. If you also think I can do this, help me out. And then, yeah, going from there, I found myself at first very overwhelmed with the rate at which stuff has to be pumped out and produced.
Yeah.
And on top of that, this whole thing with my publisher has been interesting because most of my work actually hasn't gone, like most of my work that has now been seen on TV and stuff hasn't really gone through them. I found myself in a position where I was writing and competing within my own roster at Concord. But if you look at that Concord roster, like you're fighting against like the heavyweights. You're like competing against the best of the best. You could scroll through and within the first 10 artists, like, pull out 10 of them that are on, charting top 40, charting top 20 in the States and worldwide. So that was something I had to wrap my head around. Like I said, I don't like to waste too much time trying to fight my way through something if I can find a clearer path to get what I want. And sometimes it means it's not like part of the course. It might be, a little bit of a deviation here and there. So what I was seeking out initially was Canadian writers to write with that might already have a foot in the door in these spaces, in the ad spaces, in the film and TV spaces. And what I ended up finding was like this whole world of audio production houses, essentially in Canada, because I also found during COVID, it's so important to show face, and you can do stuff over Zoom. It's not the same. And I'm sure you've heard it a million times. Yeah. So I figured this would be a great place to start, to at least like be a physical presence in a room, even if it's sitting in on a session, shaking hands, showing face, doing all that. So from there, I just started making contacts with audio houses, eventually getting offers to pitch for commercial jobs. And I think the first one I got sent, I landed, which was pretty crazy, which is for like an international Ford campampane.
So that's a pretty big one to get as your first one.
Yeah.
This job's easy. I should have done this forever ago.
I had that thought on more than one occasion, but it was nice. It was like really validating to, I don't know, like with the band stuff, you can be a band person and fight for that 5 seconds of, quote unquote, making it or whatever that thing you're striving for is. And when you play the comparison game, we have friends that are pulling in anywhere between like 500,000 to 1 million monthly listeners that are touring nonstop and playing to thousands of people. It's really easy to get down on yourself and think, damn, am I not good at this? Like, is this not the thing that I think it is in my life? So yeah, to land, your first job, your first gig, and have it be something of that magnitude is super validating.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I think that like there's a couple of points that you brought up there, which I think are important to touch on. And one of the ones that you mentioned was like the idea of speed and just getting used to working in that fast of an environment. Mm-hmm. And, I think there's a lot of people that are just really slow in this industry, whether it's like slow to write a song or slow to engineer a song or produce it or mix it. And like, there are people that I know that have been like literally spending years to finish like one song, So then when you get into like this end of things, it's like maybe you didn't anticipate the speed, but you have to very quickly learn, like, okay, like let's get my shit together so I can turn around things in a day.
Yeah, and you know
Um,
what? It's done something to the way I approach writing music for artists as well. Whether it's like my own projects or other people's projects, because I'm on this like 24-hour turnaround, I have to rely so much on things that are instinctual. Like I often have to grab attention in a piece of composed music for an advertisement within 5 seconds. So how do you make that work? You can transfer the same thing to a hook or an intro to a pop song or something like that. Um, so it's really helped to not make the process longer than it has to be. And I find often when you're relying on your instincts, you end up taking away, the better choices that you would otherwise not be making if you had, the luxury of spending a month, 2 months, a year going back and forth on things. So even with my band and this past record that we've done, since I'd already been in this composing game for, a year, 2 years, I was able to kind of bring that to the table, and it helped speed things up on the writing front, like tenfold almost.
yeah, that's amazing. And it's true, like, especially with TV stuff, it's like you have to catch people's attention right away. As soon as that
Mhm.
commercial comes on, if you spend any time waiting to get to like the catchy thing, you've lost people, and that ad's gonna tank and whatever, right? You're not gonna get those gigs afterwards. Um, but also, you're right that it's also very transferable as far as whether it's songwriting for a band or if it's for TV, that kind of thing. I remember going to a conference like I don't know, I feel like it was like 15 years ago, like Canadian Music Week, and they had someone there talking about how at the time I think it was like 90% of the songs in the Billboard Top 100 got to vocals within the first 7 seconds,
Mhm.
And I remember thinking at that point, like, oh man, 7 seconds, that's pretty fast. But it's so true. And I feel like it's even faster these days,
Oh yeah.
and so when you have that kind of thing in mind, it really does shape how you approach writing. And, you try not to bore people right away, like you get right to the catchy thing.
Yep. And you know what is like, it's super useful. I'm not someone who like has cable personally. So if in order for me to see a lot of the stuff I work on, I usually have to be streaming a hockey game or I'm at a friend's house. But it is so helpful to watch advertisements if this is, at least for my world. If you're primarily writing in TV, it's helpful to be watching TV. Um, I never skip ads anymore, which is something I always used to do. And someone at my publishing company said, like, do not skip ads because it's like it's priceless information almost, that little jingle you hear in the background of a 5 second phone commercial or you know, the sting at the end of a Subway commercial or something like that. You don't realize how much work and thought goes in to making these things like the earworms that they are.
Hmm.
So to be constantly paying attention to the trends that are going around sonically, as well as, you're going to see references repeat themselves in briefs more often than not. Whether it's, hey, we like this sparse jazzy piano thing that we've been seeing on Verbo and Airbnb ads. Like we'd like to utilize that here. It's sometimes they're going to reference things and have a video that you can watch and go back to as your bouncing off point. Sometimes they won't. And sometimes things get lost in translation because the people writing the briefs aren't necessarily musicians themselves. So that's another part of your brain. You really have to work to kind of decode what's being sent to you. More often than not, like I'm afforded the luxury of working with really talented music directors who kind of do that job for you. But even then, you'll get a client feedback note that says, "Hey, this feels too like heavy in the low end," and you might think that's a mix thing, but you also have to realize, hey, was this person sending the note a musician or was it an advertising client? If it's an advertising client, what they might mean is the you have we don't want drums and bass, we just want drums. It might be an arrangement thing. So communication is like a whole other skill I've had to perfect to like make the the broken telephone as like
Yeah.
non-complex as it can end up being sometimes where you might find yourself on revision 9 just because it's a client who's having a hard time speak musically without that kind of vocabulary, which is no one's fault, but it's a roadblock that comes up. So
Yeah. But it's kind of interesting too, because like the majority of people listening to these songs or whatever aren't musicians. So
hmm,
like, you're kind of getting that perspective of like the average listener at that point, like
Yeah.
how they would describe it, how they feel about the emotions and all that kind of stuff.
And you know what? That's something that kind of circles back to what I was touching on before. I say this now when I'm writing music with like either friends or artists, or if I'm working on an ad thing, I have to listen to it. And if I can say it's good, like that's it. Is it good? It's good. That I try to not touch it beyond that. Um, because I know most of the people listening to it are not going to have a musician's ear. They just want to know, hey, that's a catchy song. That's it. If you can go beyond that, that's amazing. But that first jumping off point is so helpful to just write something that's like accessible. It's not competing too much with picture if you're working a picture. And I have artists that I've worked with before that just they like are artists in the true sense of the word, where they pine over every little detail and every nuance of their lyrics or the song arrangement. And I say this, and my bandmate Corey says this. It's kind of what is our goal here? Are we trying to make something good, enjoyable, like something people want to come back to? That should be the first thing we tackle. If we want to add all the layers of metaphor, what's symbolic to you, what's like a cool production trick, we can do that later. But like those things are not going to do anything if the song itself isn't already 80% of the way there.
So true. Yeah, absolutely. So then you talked about like making this like catalog of things, and you talked about like trying to build that network of people and getting into publishing houses, which I think that in itself is like, that could be a whole other conversation too, of like, just getting your foot in the door with those people, right? Like, so maybe let's actually start there. So like, as far as like getting into these places, were you just like literally popping into like random publishing houses and being like, hey, I'm a songwriter, here's my portfolio, like check this out?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on everyone's journey, if you want to call it a journey. I can just kind of touch on what I have done that's proven successful. But the first audio house I approached was not, I had it in the back of my mind that I eventually wanted to weasel my way into working for, advertisements and working a picture and stuff like that. But there was a mutual connection at one of these companies and my publisher, who happened to be Canadian. So I thought, okay, this is another great use of my publisher. It's not just them getting me placements and stuff. It's, having their network of people at my fingertips. So I got in touch with a writer, producer, kind of do it all guy named Ryan Condrat, who is a partner at Grayson Music in Toronto, who now is like, that company feels like family to me. It's what I do 90% of my work with. I got in touch with him to be a potential, co-write, sending an email. Hey man, what's up? My name's Brad. I'm also published with Concord. I'm in Toronto. I would love to get together and write some music. If you got stuff going on, if I have stuff going on, like we should meet up. And he was super quick to get back to me. I think within the day he asked to FaceTime, which was awesome. I don't know if that's a normal thing or not. But I hopped on FaceTime. He seemed like a nice dude, down to earth, easy to talk to. And I think within that day, we planned to get myself into writing sessions with a couple of local Toronto artists to like do sync work and stuff. So I think like a huge lesson there, is to just like take the opportunities that are given to you. It might not seem like the obvious, like, hey, I want to get into advertising, but this isn't advertising, so I'm going to say no. Like, take it, because it's really easy for someone with a musical mind to understand, oh, okay, they're doing a great job working on this artist's like pop project. Obviously, they would be great at producing, pop jams, Dua Lipa style stuff for a McDonald's ad or for a Pepsi spot or something. So they were the ones who offered me the Ford pitch back in, I think, 2021, maybe end of 2021. And it was like after a month or so of like doing some artist stuff with them, and I I kind of just kept hounding them, like, let me do advertising stuff. I'd love to do advertising stuff. And I don't think that would have happened if it was just over Zoom, unfortunately. I have a lot of friends that are what I would consider like way more talented musicians, artists, producers than myself, but they aren't in an area that like allows them that face-to-face access. And some people like make it work. I feel like I'm not necessarily one of those people. I feel like I gel way better with people in person. So I was finding myself going to like holiday parties, meeting the people in the advertising world to show face. And for anyone that knows me, I don't drink. Like I'm not a very extroverted person. I don't go out too often. So that's something I had to just like wrap my head around. Was I can prove to them musically that I'm capable of this stuff, but I also have to be someone who they can work with and communicate with and want to be in a room with potentially, and that's huge. Like I'm sure there are insanely talented people out there that are just a pain in the ass to work with. And more often than not, those people don't end up getting gigs. Like the relationship building is 50% of the job, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like you created that opportunity for yourself, just like taking a chance of like, hey, do you want to do a co-write? Like something as simple as that. It's like a no pressure situation. You shot your shot and see what happens, right?
There's no pressure. And I am someone who gets like very anxious about throwing myself into new things, which is silly because I've been on the receiving end of people saying, hey, I'd love to co-write with you. I'd love to collaborate and do XYZ. And it's never something that puts me out or offends me. Like if anything, it's exciting, right? So
yeah,
I have to constantly remind myself, and I think people should constantly remind themselves that, musicians are musicians. Like at the end of the day, we all have the same like passions and interests in this thing that we do. So yeah, shoot your shot, I guess is like what I'm trying to say there.
Yeah, of course. No, you're right though. It's like the musician community is actually like, you're right. We all have the same passion for this stuff. So it's surprising how accessible people are. Even with this podcast, like I reach out to some people, like some names that like every time I send an email to a name to like, hey, you want to be on the podcast? I immediately think like they're never going to get back to me. And somehow this podcast is like almost 200 episodes in now. And like the majority of episodes are interviews. And it's like, holy shit. That's just from taking a shot,
Yeah, dude, musicians love music. Like that's why we that's why we punish ourselves with this this life, yeah, I think being able to like reach out to people, I've reached out to like producers who I've like sent samples to and stuff. I'd never expect a DM in return from that are like working on huge R&B cuts and stuff like that. And doesn't mean that necessarily they're going to use everything right away or it's going to get placed, but just to have that person on the other end say, hey, this stuff is fire, this stuff is amazing, like if you ever have more, send it my way, like we'll be in touch. That kind of validation it's almost like a kick of adrenaline to like keep the wheels turning essentially.
Yeah.
And then that, going back to what I was saying about getting the ball rolling and like working for advertisements and stuff like that. Once I put myself out there, and maybe this is because I landed the first thing that was sent to me. It would have happened, I'm sure, at some point. It will for most people who get into this line of work. Like you will get something at some point. I know my case probably isn't like the norm, but things will snowball super quickly. I got my first placement on that Ford ad. And quickly after that, it sparks interest in another music director who says, oh, like, who's this new guy that does this? Like, should we bring him on board for this new thing? And the more you can kind of try to replicate what you've done, but add a little bit of something else just to show, hey, I'm not just the guy who does like, the big Ford rock stuff. I'm not just the guy who does the orchestral underscores. I always try to throw something that's like a little left to center in the request, just so it shows people like, hey, I can also do this. I can take this idea further.
Which is an interesting idea right there too, because like some people would look at that and be like, I have to do exactly what's pitched to me because like that's what they want. And if I vary from that, then like I'm going to lose the gig because it's out of left field, So it's an interesting approach.
Especially when it's like, it's not a sure thing when you're pitching for these ads or you're writing to picture, you're usually competing with other people. So you kind of have to try your best to stand out. And it's hard sometimes to have your own voice when you have such strict kind of constraints and guidelines on what the request is. You can't get too crazy on a Tim Hortons ad because it's Tim Hortons.
Yeah.
So that is like a fun challenge every time you get something from a really familiar brand that has like what I would call a safe kind of demographic and target audience, where it's kind of like, how can I inject a little bit of something to make this exciting? Sometimes that is like the key to landing a huge placement. Other times it might not be what the client wants because they're set on, the 5 things they've listed and they don't want to deviate. But the music director you're working with, who is essentially the middle person, they might appreciate hearing that, because then they'll have it in the back of the mind. Hey, like the client didn't love this, but we at the audio house all thought this was going to be the track. We thought this was amazing. So come on to this next job with us. You always have to be thinking kind of about the next thing, because a job can finish and wrap within 24 hours, if you're freelance like myself. So
Yeah.
that's something I always keep in mind. And funny enough, I've had jobs where I've done something really weird, having, you need to keep things fresh for yourself as well, especially
Of course.
in advertising. Things are so based on what's trendy at the moment, what the other guys are doing essentially. And you get in this rut where you find yourself writing 10 different versions of more or less the same track for a bunch of different people. So every once in a while I'll take a shot in the dark at some weird idea I have. And the last few times I've done that, not only has it like sparked interest in the audio house and gotten great feedback, it's been the track that's been selected for the ad. And then later on, a month or so down the line, I received an email from a different audio house who's asking me to come on this job. And when they reference what the client has used as their jumping off point, it's been my track from the last ad, so that's always helpful too, in this world, to be like, sharing credits where credits due and stuff like that, because you land something one place, another audio house is going to say, well, we're working with this brand now, and that's the guy who did it last time. So he might have the formula,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it sounds like you definitely have to get used to rejection, and you have to just be comfortable with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for people who might not be familiar with this world of like the publishing side of things, like from a financial standpoint, like, are you getting paid to write these, to take your shot for this, or is it only if you're getting selected?
So when I do stuff for these audio houses, this is a reason I kind of deviated like from my publishing company and went direct for like work for hire composition stuff, because what I've primarily done with the publishing company is make connections, and beyond a few like promo things that have landed, that's essentially it. So yeah, like on the Canadian side of things, I'm not sure if it's because we're unionized, but when you are writing for these pitches, you're getting paid a demo fee. Sometimes the audio house will have that set at like $3.50 a demo, and a demo is anything from 6 to 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, rarely beyond that. If it is beyond that, sometimes they'll pay a little more for your demo, for your time. So it never feels like your time's wasted, essentially. Like, write 15, 30 seconds of music, make $350 plus
Not bad,
that's that's any musician, at any age would think, oh, that's great. That's a great gig. And then, from there are like multiple ways. If your music does end up getting picked, it can be licensed, or it can go through a union contract, which in Canada seems to be a 50-50 toss up in my experience, through the AFM or CFM is like our union here. And it's like a normal license, like a 13-week cycle is like the average, I think, for TV. And usually if there's TV, they would be silly to not also license your music for online, because everyone's watching stuff on their laptops and YouTube and stuff like that. But with the publishing side, when there is a request to come in, like they're not paying for your demos, because they've already given you an advance, right, for your publishing deal. Which, some people might be happy to just, they paid me X amount of dollars for my rights and for my work. I'm happy to do it. But because in our situation, they were signing the band essentially, it wasn't a number that I feel comfortable with always just like sitting around Monday to Friday, writing demos for free, crossing my fingers. There's got to be some sense of security. So yeah, like with these audio houses in Canada, there's an audio house in Germany I've done some work for as well, who all pay like a demo fee. So no one's time is ever wasted, because it's it's very easy for a musician in my position to be taken advantage of, I think.
Of course.
Which, and I'm like everyone else. I've had good and bad experiences with these audio houses. You got to track your payments, like unless you are signed or a full-time salary paid employee with these places, which is now like very few and far between. Because why would you limit yourself to 4 people when you can have this whole palette of people who dive into hip hop and people who dive into EDM stuff or orchestral whatever. It's really on you to kind of do everything. Like you're the one looking after your finances. You're the one getting in touch with the accountants. You're the one signing off on contracts. You're like, unless you find a company like a Grayson who has producers that go up and beyond, I think, what their job normally would entail, where they handle everything for you. So the creator can just focus on the creation. It is a lot to wrap your head around when you first get into it.
I would assume that like every pitch comes along with its own contract as well, right? Like its own terms.
I mean, maybe other places. Usually how it works, when I get in touch with an audio host for the first time, either I'll have an agreement with them about like, here's my demo fee.
Gotcha. Like a blanket agreement kind of thing.
Yeah, 1 to 30 seconds, you pay me this much. If it goes beyond that, maybe we figure something out. Or the audio house, more often than not, will have like an agreement, a freelancer agreement of their own, which will then lay out like, this is what we pay all our freelancers. If you're registered as a business, your HST is applicable, all that. And it's helpful too, I think, when companies do have that, because you're able to see like what the potential is to bring home, which the older you get as a musician, like the dollar signs are something that are like very much on your mind, especially when you want this to be your forever thing. I'm fortunate now where like this will likely be the thing I get to do forever. But at first, when you're stepping into this world, it's like, it's really murky on what's appropriate pay, what's not, or like what to even expect. I'm still in a position where I'm not 100% on like why certain things pay so much more than others. I'll just give like one example. I don't want to get too much into like the money aspect of it, but I've done projects where I've had like 60 tracks with violas and cellos and like all this crazy stuff. And, maybe you sign off on your freelance agreement that you get like between 25 and 50% of the license. So that, you get like a few $1,000 in your account and then are on to the next job, which is great. It's amazing money to any musician. But then I've done jobs where I've written 10 to 15 seconds with a single line of, piano on a VST. And you turn around and, okay, Brad, invoice this for, this job. The license was, like close to a $10,000 mark. And I don't know what, like, I don't know if it's because it's a big name brand or like, I don't know how that works. I wish I'm hoping I find that out. And then
somebody is a gatekeeper with that info, right?
It's, but yeah, like, unless there's a contract there, you really have no idea what to expect. I know some companies are hesitant to like include the win fee or the license fee in their like their brief or their pitch. But if I'm really curious, I'll just ask. Like, there's no harm. Like I said, you got to put yourself out there. There's no harm in asking. At the very least, they'll say, "Hey, the client we prefer to not share that information." But you do have the right to ask. So
yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, and it's good to hear because I've always been aware of like that traditional publishing, right, where it's like, yeah, you get that advance, and then you're writing songs and you're just spending all that time, and you're not sure if you're going to get that money back ever. Versus at least when you have a demo fee and like you're covered, and I think that definitely makes it like you said, the older you get, the more important money becomes. Whether we like it or not, that is the truth. It's like if we want to make a career off of it, it has to happen.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And you know what? I do think that maybe if I were working with a smaller publishing company, maybe it would be a different situation. Like maybe, the likelihood of me writing stuff for them and it getting placed would actually be higher because I'm not going against, the guys who produce for Drake, when they're pitching for the new season of Dave or something like that. That's just like, that's been my experience. But I think because of the caliber of artist and producer that I'm working with and against in like the publishing, actual publishing side, not like the work for hire composing side. Um, the bar is like way higher, and not only is the bar higher, the pool is way bigger. I think at most when I'm doing this composing and producing for picture freelance with audio houses, I think I'm only competing with maybe 10 people, at the most at any given time. Sometimes maybe as little as 5 people, which, ups your chances
Of
significantly.
course, yeah. No, that's a really good point, and something that I think is important to know, because yeah, you think like, oh, it's kind of like, coming from the band world, so many people, at least old school way of thinking of it, was like a record label is going to save the day, like you get this like big deal and like all of a
Yeah.
sudden you become famous as a result of it. So people have that same thought still, where it's like, oh, if I'm with the big publishing house, like I'm going to get the best gigs because they're the best of the best. And then you don't realize like, okay, well now I'm this small fish in a big pond.
That's exactly what it is. And it's not to say that you can't, become that bigger fish at some point. Some people are going to be quicker at it than others. Some people are going to be able to do it right away because they just like have that thing that people want and what people are looking for. Um, I think I've become like very self-aware and very like cognizant of what my abilities are and what would set myself up against, whoever else is in the room. Like what can I offer that they can't? And right now it's been within this advertising space. It's been this ability to, have a wide range of influences to pull from, this like kind of broad stroke palette, as well as like my turnaround time, I think is a huge appeal now, where, people will send me a job. They maybe already have writers on and think, oh, we could really use one more demo. There's only, 12 hours till we present it to the client. Let's go to Brad. He can do this. I think that's something I prioritized when I was getting into this as well, is like just being able to, like I said, write something. Is it good? Give myself the thumbs up, not worry or fuss too much about necessarily the mix or master, like get it good to my ears and trust that, they will communicate that's something that can always be adjusted down the line. So having that, turnaround time be super quick and efficient is something I think I can offer at a quicker pace than most people.
Yeah.
Even like our guitarist Corey, who's a mixing engineer, he works on a lot of music where he's turning things around quickly. Um, but I know sometimes I'll give him a little peek into my world and he's like sweating. Which now it doesn't seem like this high stakes, anxiety inducing process for me. Like it seems fun. And when I'm given 3 days now, like that's almost something that ends up shooting myself in the foot, because when you're used to just like committing to ideas, um, you know, bouncing everything down within an hour of writing it, uh, when you break that that
Yeah, that's true.
pace, you just start making weird decisions. Like, and I don't know if that's like something other people have experienced, but I've definitely like ruined mixes or like overthought arrangements, or done things I should not have done because of the extra day or two to work on something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like you can start to overthink it. And even though you're done it, like, you could be done it in an hour, but then like have an extra 3 days to sit
Mhm.
on it and be like, can I make a tweak to that? Like, of course, as soon as you introduce that idea in your head, you're gonna go for it. You're gonna try
Yeah,
something, and then you're in this rabbit hole of like, all these things that are probably just taking away from that initial gut feel of what it
yeah,
needs to be.
and it's like super helpful too to be able to go back to the brief if you have a written brief. I have some nightmare stories of like not receiving a written brief and just having to hope I made all the right notes over a phone call. But it is helpful to go back and see a note that says like, we do not want music competing with what we're seeing on screen. Like
Yeah,
that, a note like that is a game changer. Because you could have this amazing piece of music, but really at the end of the day, like they don't want the listener really paying attention to it. They
hmm
want maybe like evoking an emotion because of what they're seeing going hand in hand
yeah,
with your music. Um, and on the inverse, you might have, a spot where the music is what sells the visual, um, there were like TikTok transition trends and stuff going on last year where that was a huge thing where they every fourth bar, we need like some earworm thing in the music because that's going to inform the visual transitions before they even shoot the commercial. Um, so it's nice to remind yourself and like ground yourself, like, okay, like I don't need to worry too much about this music because it literally is in the background. Like it might even be diegetic. It might be a piece of music that's sounding like it's coming from a diner, like on the radio. Like don't
Yeah.
waste too much time on it.
I'm glad that you brought that up though, because it is, you're going to be writing sometimes to music, sometimes sometimes to picture, sometimes not to picture, and that in itself is it's the new challenge for writing something, and it is interesting. There's that idea of like writing music that isn't going to be, it's going to be impactful, but not in the way of dialogue or of actually what's happening on the screen. So, when it comes to writing music like that, like what considerations should people have about like thinking about, if they don't have a visual, like what kind of considerations should people be thinking about to make sure that they're writing music that can be used?
Yeah, for me, I think when it's a pre-visual project, so no commercial has been shot, no trailer's been filmed, like they're starting with the music in mind. And this is usually to like inform someone on the editing side at like the pace at which things are going to transition and stuff. You kind of have the luxury of being a little more creative. Some people might find that challenging, but I think what I always try to do is read through like what the visual is going to eventually try to capture emotionally. And if you can, it's like this gut feeling thing. I know I keep saying that, but to be able to sit down and write a chord progression or start with, an impactful something that captures that gut feeling, that emotion, and what they're going for, usually that's like a good sign you're on the right path. Because when people are listening to the music pre-visual, it's just something they need to also feel as well. And I feel like most ears pick up on the same things. So if it's something that already has picture, sometimes I start on different places. There's usually like an emphasis on what the most important part of the arrangement should be. You might get a note that says, we want this, super percussive. We want this very bouncy, bright, upbeat, choppy, and this will inform XYZ. If I see that, my jumping off point is the drums. Like I don't put a melody down. I don't put a bass line down. I will open up Contact and, fire away at percussion and try to get that, because that's the thing that they're prioritizing. So before I even think about melody, like if that's already 80% of the way there, if that's sounding good to my ears, like that's a great place to start. The melody is second in that sense. But yeah, more often than not, I think just trying to write something that elicits an emotion. You'll get sent temp music every once in a while as well, which can be helpful, just to like sonically put you in the right space. They sometimes it's a bad thing, because I've had projects where they'll send reference music, you go through 9 rounds of revisions and shortlists and this whole thing just for them to end up using the temp music on the final project.
Everyone I've ever talked to that's had to go against a temp score or something has the same story,
Yeah. So that can be soul crushing. And then the more it happens, the more you get used to it and realize that's just the way of the world. But what I find helpful to like maybe give a director something that they're not expecting, even though they have this temp and they have this list of notes. Listen to the temp. Don't worry about necessarily the melody. Again, like what's the emotion that the music is conveying? And there might be like a thing that stands out to you, and you have to kind of trust yourself as a musician with like a musician's ear. It might be like the pace in the crescendo of a piano at the end as like a spot builds. Like that's the thing that like kind of gives you that jolt when you're watching it. Then you think, okay, that's the thing I'm going to implement on my piece of music, but I might not do it with piano. I might do it with strings, or I might go straight percussion there. It also helps to just have like silence, even if you have temp music. I'll often A/B with temp music, and then I will watch it with nothing, because when I watch it with nothing, it's interesting to write on a, like, in MIDI, whether it's a piano or whatever, where I think music should be if it's more of a scored sort of piece. And then turning on their audio and seeing like where you kind of intersect. Like, okay, the temp music and my brain told me that this is the spot that music needs to be present. Like this needs to be in the forefront. Um, there might be a moment where you don't want music at all, which I think is like the most impactful thing, believe it or not.
Yeah.
There's something that drives me nuts in movies, and no shade to Hans Zimmer, but like there's nothing I hate more than an overscored piece of picture, whether it's a movie or show or trailer or commercial. Like the coolest moments to me are when you're building and things disappear. So trying to find like a moment in a spot is like super helpful. And it's really hard to do that when you're only focusing on the temp music or you're only focusing on like the crazy sound design that's going on. It really helps to just keep things silent and try to hear it in your head as like what makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And are you like, are you doing like the sound design portion of it as well? Like, or is it just like the music and then some sound effects editors doing their own thing, or like what?
Yeah. If I'm feeling cheeky, I will
Okay.
I'll add some sound design. Sometimes like the extent that I'll do it to is, a picture might start on a scene, and then as the camera pulls away, you realize it's happening on the TV. So I might like transform the audio into this diegetic, like in the room sound. And there's like sound design things I'll do every now and again where if I see something on the screen, twirling from left to right, I'll make sure I have something in the audio that can signal to the viewer to pay attention to this thing going from left to right, whether it's like text or it's I don't know, a Nike shoe flying
Yeah.
across the screen. Like those are things that are really good to pay attention to because you can use audio as your friend and sound design as your friend. Sometimes I'm like given a sound design track from an audio house. Most of them have sound designers, but even then, I think everyone's appreciative of like those little details that you might find because they might just be doing the Foley and the big whooshes and impact sounds and stuff like that, but they might not think to do like a spherical pan on something you see on screen, or they might not think to high pass and low pass like some instrument that makes sense in relation to what the viewer's seeing.
I love it, man. Dude, this is it's really fascinating because like, yeah, there are so many different, like it's just a different approach to writing.
Mhm.
It's not like your typical band thing where
No.
you have a verse, chorus, whatever, It's like you're really reacting
Yeah.
to what's there and trying to evoke an
Yeah.
emotion.
Yeah. And like I think that what I would consider like the biggest emphasis I could put on any sort of project like this, it's similar to writing band music where whether it's the chorus or a moment in the bridge, and maybe this is also just because the kind of music my bands make where it's like, almost over emotional, quote unquote emo, punk rock, whatever, alt rock music. Um, I've always liked writing where there is like a moment in a song, whether that's instrumental or lyrical. So transferring that to like a music for media, music for picture sort of landscape, your chorus is like the goosebump moment. That's something you'll find very often in a brief or working with a director. If it's not a goosebump moment, they want the pin drop moment, or they want this moment that like you can't do anything but like have your eyes fixated on the screen, absorbing what you're seeing. So our job as composers and musicians and writers is treat it like a chorus, like that's your moment, or the big final line in a bridge. Like this is the moment you want people to take away, and you want to do your best to your own ability to like elevate the visual, unless you're told otherwise. But yeah, I think treating that like a chorus and like finding that moment is like key. And sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes you'll get a job where they want that moment and maybe it's not there in the video, and maybe you don't have a video yet, so it's hard to imagine where it is or what makes sense. And that's fine. That's just like you said, you got to get used to rejection, and sometimes sometimes you're not the person for the job, which is all good. It's also super motivating to end up you see the commercial that you didn't get 2 months, 3 months down the road, and think, yeah, like that person deserved that because I couldn't have written this. Like that's a
Mm-hmm.
perspective and like came from someone's ear, that's not my own.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a fascinating world. And I used to work in audio post-production too. And one of the things that always caught my attention there was like, anytime you work with the producer, there's just so many different opinions of what's good and bad. And
Yeah.
like, and it's a hard gig because you're always dealing with someone else's opinion, and
Yeah,
it's not necessarily about who's best, you know?
that's the thing. Like a lot of my peers, a lot of my peers that don't necessarily do what I do, but they're in music creation and stuff. I mentioned this earlier, but like the comparison game it's like a killer. It's like so parasitic to constantly be doing that because music's like so objective. Like that's all it is, you know. Um, so when someone lands a job and you don't, or you might have like a month stretch where you're like demoing, it doesn't mean that like you've lost it. It doesn't mean that you don't have that touch anymore. Like, someone's outperforming you, or sometimes that's the case, and that's like a great motivator to be better. But just like reassuring yourself that, hey, I wrote a great piece of music, and trusting, and having that confidence in yourself, um, is like it's a good way to, like, I guess, keep the vibe up, keep the mood up, keep it something you want to keep coming back to. Because now I'm faced with rejection all the time, but it doesn't seem like rejection to me. It's just when I'm writing these demos for advertising, let's say, when I write them, like, that is the job. If I get the license on top, then that's like, your bonus Christmas pay. Let's call it. It's that sort of thing. So I'm going into it, like, in the back of my mind, obviously, like, hoping I get the job, but I'm just writing for this demo fee. Like, that's what the job is. And if I get, hey, you didn't land this one, you can send us an invoice and send us the stems for this track. Cool. Like, move
Still
on.
a win.
Move on to the next. Yeah, move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. And yeah, the more you can also kind of take a peek at the things that are landing. Like, if you do find yourself in my position and you're working in this world, um, it is like a fun exercise to kind of take away, like, yeah, that's not how I would have done it, but I can see why this director went with this track. It might be something as simple as, like, they didn't like the saxophone sound I had, or they didn't like how my cello was like too oversaturated in reverb, or it might be these little details. These are good things to, like, kind of catalog and take note of.
Yeah. Dude, I've found this so fascinating talking with you about all this stuff. And I know this is an area of the music industry that I get a lot of questions about, and a lot of students that are working on stuff and wanting to get sync deals and all that kind of stuff. And, it's good to hear from someone who is making a career out of this stuff, and like
Yeah, yeah.
living it and seeing like exactly what your process is. And I think it's good for people to hear about the ups and downs and the rejections and this and that, because it's the reality. So
Yep. And it helps you, like, carve your own path. Like, if anything else, it helps you really figure out, like, I might be good at a million things, and that might be something you sell yourself on, but what is the thing? Like, out of those million things, what is the one thing, like, that can kind of encapsulate, like, your skill set? And I think, like, going through the rejection and then the uncomfortable networking phases and putting yourself out there and taking a shot in the dark, like, doing all this stuff will help you realize, like, what's worth pursuing, what's worth maybe deviating from, or taking a step back from. And then, like, you might have the bonus of, like, finding your own, like, musical identity and voice in that as well, which is something everyone strives for.
yeah.
But yeah, at the end of the day, like, I got into music to play in bands, not realizing, like, this whole new thing that I'm doing now. This will be what I do for most of my life now. Like this will be almost what defines, like, my musical ability, and kind of like what I present to the world. So yeah, I think just, like, finding your lane and, like, doing what you got to do to make it work. People might surprise themselves, and I have friends that are mixing engineers that, if you told them 15 years ago, like, you're not going to be the guy on stage playing drums, you're going to be the guy sitting at a computer turning knobs and working with outboard gear, they might have scratched their heads, but now they can't see it any other way.
Yeah.
So it kind of just takes, like, immersing yourself in new things.
Of course. I love it. Dude, I think that's a perfect spot to wrap up. But if people want to learn more about you or your bands or whatever online, like, where's the best place for them to do that?
I have a website with my own personal stuff that is in desperate need of updating, but you can check that out at www.bradxgarcia.com. I got links to ads I've worked on if people are interested in that. And as for the bands, You can follow us on Instagram or TikTok and all that stuff. We're at Locket. I think on Twitter we might be something else, but who cares about that app anyways? And then my other band is at Like Pacific.
Right on. Brad, thank you so much for doing this. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
So that was my chat with Brad Garcia, and I really enjoyed that. I think if you're someone who is trying to find different avenues in the music industry to make a career out of it and to utilize your songwriting skills and your production skills and all that kind of stuff, I think that the music publishing side of things is very, very fascinating. And I really enjoyed learning more about that process with Brad and what kind of opportunities come up and what the revision process is like and the speed of it, and even just the idea of the work for hire jobs versus traditional publishing. I love that Brad talked about that because I think that that is a really important thing to understand if you're going to get into this industry. If you're trying to make decisions as to whether you should sign with a publisher or if you should do it all on your own and go freelance, I think Brad brought up some really good points about all of that here. And I also really appreciated the detail that he went into in terms of how he dissects the projects that he gets and, how he comes up with music and what kind of things he's considering as he's writing. That's all really important stuff. And I know I've had a lot of students reach out to me saying, like, how do I get my songs licensed? Or how do I do songs for film and TV? And I think that if you take what Brad talked about in this episode, you can apply a lot of this and definitely get some great results. So definitely go back to this episode, take all the advice and take action on what Brad talked about here. And I think that if you follow all of that, you can increase your chances of getting your songs licensed and potentially making a bunch of money with it too. So, hey, that's always good too, right? So yeah, I definitely really enjoyed having Brad on here. And I thought it was great to have someone talk about music publishing because we talk a lot about all the technical, nerdy stuff about production, but I also think it's really important to talk about various areas of the industry where you can utilize these skills. So super glad to have Brad on the podcast. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please make sure to subscribe to it. That way you're notified about all new episodes as they go live each and every Wednesday morning. And if you're someone who is working on music at home and you're not quite getting your music to the quality standards that you expect to hear, if you're looking for personal one-on-one help with that, inside of my coaching program, Amplitude, I work directly with my students to offer personalized, actionable feedback on what you can do with your tracks. You simply send your songs in once you're done mixing them, and you're going to get a detailed video walking you through all of the different steps with EQ, compression, volume, automation, whatever your songs need to help it get to that next level. And inside of this program, not only do you get that actionable feedback, but we get to go back and forth on it as well. So you're not just getting one set of notes and trying it out and then discovering that you have new problems in your mix and you're not sure what to do with those. Instead, we work back and forth on your songs until they're done. This way you can feel completely confident that you've taken the right steps with your songs and you can get them to a level where you're ultimately proud of them and excited to release them. Now, in addition to getting one-on-one support and feedback through this program, you also get access to a ton of extra training to help you throughout the entire recording, editing, and mixing process. So you're basically getting handholding all the way through the process to make sure you're covering the right steps. Plus, in addition to all of that training, you also get access to mastering and a whole bunch more. So if you're interested in learning more about this program, make sure to visit masteryourmix.com/amplitude. And that's where you can find all the information about the program. And then I'd love to hop on a call with you to learn more about your specific goals and what kind of projects you're working on to see if I can truly help. And if it does seem like we can truly help you out, then I'd love to have you in the program and work directly with you. So once again, make sure to visit masteryourmix.com/amplitude to find out all the info there. With that said, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. Talk soon. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. To have your questions answered, submit your questions to questions@masteryourmix.com. Please go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review. And for more information on how you can improve your mixes, visit masteryourmix.com.